Hello, non-places vehicles on the internet. Tenny back with another roll-scale showcase. Now, this showcase is going to be showcasing a model of a 060 tender engine I made. Now, the funny thing about this engine is that it has a really interesting story now with Saved from Scrap. This is my model of SECR's 01 number 65.
Number 65 was built at Ashford in 1896 as the Sterling O class, shown here. And she ran, and then in 1908, she then received a rebuild to be a SECR 01 class, with slight differences at the smoke box and the inclusion of a dome. And she ran until she was withdrawn from service in 1961. Because her class, the SECR 01s, were to be replaced by the C class. And then in 1963, she was then bought by the late Mr. Lewis Evans, and then kept at the Ashford Steam Center on display. Hey all, Tenny here. Okay, so, first of all, I'm not going to be using the tugboat anymore for a while, because I feel like being Tenny. And second of all, while I was editing this video, I got a little bit curious and tried to see if there's any actual video of the Ashford Steam Center, because looking at just the still images is very boring. And it turns out, yeah, there actually was, which I'll be playing for you now.
The Longhedge built number 592 moved to the Bluebell in 1970 and is now fully restored. The other two followed later.
So, yeah, that's, something. Anyways, back to your normal scheduled video, yo. At least a few years. Here's the thing. Sadly, the Ashford Steam Center slowly just kind of fell apart in a way where they only got the open for once a month, and then after a while it then closed. And so the engines came with it. Some engines were sold off to places, some heritage railways and maybe some private collectors, and others were hidden. But number 65 was to sadly soon be repossessed by BR, which would then, of course, lead her to meet the Cutter's Torch. So, what her owner did was that. Okay, so, if you might be very confused if you haven't seen the Train of Thought or Chrissy and Green video yet. So, I'll explain what happened. So basically, BR won't get their hands on her. They end up taking her apart and leaving her frames and tender at Sussex. Her body and her cab basically just went kablooey. And for a few years, she actually stayed like that until her current owner, I'm pretty sure it wasn't Lewis Evans, approached the Bluebell Railway to ask if they can restore her, and they politely said yeah. And so now, number 65 is either on display or running at the Bluebell Railway. Now, that was a pretty long history lesson. I can kind of tell because we're at the 4-minute mark, I think. So, let's go to the next chapter, basically. Her looks and aesthetic. Or just, how close did I get to actually recreating her, style-wise? So as you can physically see, I kinda failed. And quite disappointingly, that's kind of in part because, she doesn't really look much like number 65 looking at her, and looks more like a modified reskin of a Donald or Douglas model. And I'll admit, a level of detail and liveries, and honestly just livery altogether, wasn't really interpreted right. But aside from that, it's at least sort of, in a way, make outable, like where you can actually kind of say confidently that it's number 65. Like the inclusion of the injector, and whatever the hell these things are. I don't really know. All I know is that steam engines look pretty. Not to mention the exposed springs of the tender, and the numbers on the front. So I can confidently say that the model itself is at least close, but there's also at least a level of detail which is missing. Now, aside from that, let's move on to the next chapter. I'll talk about the detail in the final one, because now we're going to be talking about its running. Now, running-wise, number 65 is actually a really stellar runner. And she has no real problems with her running. So she can run on switches just fine, go on curves without getting stuck, and her speed is actually reasonable for her class. Now, granted, you might mention my Drayton Manor Thomas model, but come on, the thing doesn't even go that fast anyways. And she looks really stellar when it comes to running with rolling stock. And this footage alone can just kinda prove it. Anyways, I think it's time we go over my final thoughts and final words regarding this model. Now, my final thoughts on this model is exactly as follows. Personally, in my opinion, I could have done better with it, style-wise anyways. But performance, yeah, it's actually kind of nice, and I would use it for, like, any sort of, row-scale Bluebell Railway thingy, or whatever. Just like anything that at least would require, or would need the, number 65, or any engine, altogether. Just, it's very nice. And I guess I'd use it. But there are some things which I could have done better, and there are other, and, yeah, that's really it. I just could have done better aesthetically, but it's at least an okay model overall. And now I think it's time number 65 at least gets a little bit of rest. What do you say? And I couldn't say more. Best to get in the shot already. Oh right, I remember! I made another model of an engine from the Bluebell Railway. But I think I'll talk about her another time.